So that brings us to just you've been doing this for a long, long time. And I guess one of the things as a kind of overview now would be worth just sitting back and saying, okay, how have your working habits shifted over that time? How many of the things that you used to do you don't do? How many things that you used to do you still do? And if you were talking to those young academics and you're talking to people setting off, how do you think now you would advise them if they were going into the kind of work that you've been doing over the last 50, 60 years or however long it's been now? It's been a long time.
Well, this I'm going to take more broadly as working methods,
Yeah.
because from very early on, even in my preparatory school, I recognized I was not very, whatever the word is, it's not intelligent, but I was not very gifted in the way that some of the very clever boys at that school were. I was never in the scholarship classes and so on. So no one ever said, put him in for a Eton or something like that. It was clear I was middling, not too bad, not too good. And this was also true of my games playing. At least had no natural gifts. I was small and slow and not very strong. And in each case, I thought to myself increasingly, okay, if you don't have particular gifts, what are you going to do about it if you want to succeed? And what I realized is that you can overcome a great deal by method, a combination of hard work, applying yourself, dedicating yourself, and really trying. I came to believe through games that if you really, really try hard, you can get a long way. And I did actually get a long way at school, just through sheer bravery and hard tackling and the rest. And it was the same increasing with work, particularly when I went up into my sixth form. I realized that if I thought carefully about how to structure my day, my time, my space, then I could achieve things which other people who are cleverer than me probably wouldn't achieve. It's the same philosophy that's behind Descartes' discourse on method. He says, I'm not particularly talented, but I'll give you some methods which will make you successful.
Can I just interject here? Because I think this is really important, especially as somebody who's a school teacher. I mean, most of the people that you're teaching, including yourself, are average and a lot of them aren't even average, but the things that you've talked about previously, when you talk about education, about grit and courage and keeping going and being part of a team and giving it a go, all those kind of things that come out of what we've called the English system, but they seem very, very important to what you're saying now about yourself as a successful professor of anthropology at Cambridge, which is quite encouraging. I would think. I just thought it would be worth just emphasizing those attributes that you just described, because without those, you're just relying on, if you like, your aptitude, your native genius. Most of us don't have enough of that to carry us through. That's real, really, isn't it?
Well, it is very important. I mean, I don't know where I got this faith from. I mean, it must have been instilled by my mother, who used to despair of me, but also have hopes for me, and my grandparents. And my teachers were always very encouraging. They said he could be really good, but he's not there yet. So I had the carrot dangled in front of me. But I had this feeling, confidence, that basically I was as good as other people. My uncle was an inspiration because he was 8 years older than me, and we played together, and he encouraged me as well. But my view has always been that, as we know, talent is distributed almost evenly. Most people are not much cleverer than other people. And therefore, both in regard to myself and in regard to other people, I've always taken the view when, for example, meeting people, whatever their background and so on, I see that they could potentially flourish. And I always try to treat my students in this way, always encourage them and say, you could be really good, but this is not particularly good, and this is why it's not particularly good, and so on. Because if you give them self-confidence, self-confidence is the most important of all things. If you believe in yourself, then you can do a great deal. But what I discovered was that you needed certain methods, not Descartes' methods, but the arrangement of space. Now that seems unimportant. What do you mean by that? Well, firstly, anyone who's looked at teaching and learning knows that how you arrange the space around you. For example, you should have separate places. If you're doing serious work, you should have a separate place to do work away from where you do other things. I mean, some of my gifted friends have written their books at the dining table and so on and so on. But ideally, and that's why we have a separate barn, even if you have so my bedroom when I was 17 years old was a special space for me for thinking and working. And from the age of 22, 23, I had a garden shed into which I used to go and retreat. So setting up a special space, even if it's an imaginary special space, if you surround yourself with something, and in there you are out of time and space, and the pressures go away because you need to shut out the outside world when you're concentrating. The other thing about space is that you need to arrange it so all the things that you really need are close to you. So you think of yourself at the center of concentric circles. So my desk has lots of space to lay out what I'm currently working on. The books I really love and think I'll probably look at are placed behind me. These are all the great thinkers. There's Maitland and Max Weber and Tocqueville, and all these people are just behind me there. And then other books. And when I start writing a new book, I move the books that I'm going to work on that from to the shelves just behind me. So ideally, you should never have to leave your desk. You should be able to turn round and pick letters to Lily off the shelf, as it were. And likewise, all that you're working on. Again, the space, the desks mustn't be too jumbled. You have to have a clear space. A lot of my friends seem to work in a total mess. The space around you is for laying out things temporarily, not for storing masses of stuff. I mean, while you're working on it, it looks a mess, but as soon as then you clear it away. And so the arrangement of space, making a magical, weave a circle round him thrice, for he on honeydew hath fed and drunk the milk of paradise. Weave a circle round him thrice. That's one thing you have to do with space. The other thing you have to organize is time, because the obvious fact is that most humans can't concentrate in an intense way for more than 6, maybe 8 hours in a day. We've talked about this with Japanese and Chinese education. Therefore, you need to find out what is your best working time, if you have a choice about it. What is the length and duration of concentration for you? And then build your day around that. I think of my days as sort of a cup of milk, and there's cream on the top. So I organize my days so that the maximum period of productivity and concentration is as clear as possible. For me, that's from about 9 o'clock till 12 o'clock, those 3 hours, and maybe through to lunchtime. Then you have lunch and you have a small period when you can still keep awake. Then basically from about 2:30 or 3 till after tea is dead time for me. And our schools recognize this, and that was when we played games and so on and so on. Then there's another period, perhaps from sort of 5 to 7 or something, when you can concentrate, and then I stopped. So basically from very early at school, I would make those my working times. And they were, of course, the school working times. So it was built into me. But I preserved that. And so I wouldn't work for more than 6 or 8 hours a day. But you can get an awful lot done if you're not too tired, because concentration goes down very quickly. The other point about it is how long your attention span or concentration can last. Most studies suggest it's about 45 minutes, 40 minutes. For example, when I gave lectures, I always used to stop after 40 minutes and give the students a minute or two, either to ask questions or just to relax. And that was the thing they always commented on, that was terribly helpful, and I showed some consideration for them. But that's also true of me at my reading. So what I always do, and this is really important advice, is work really hard, particularly the most difficult thing of all, which is writing. Write for no more than 45 minutes or 50 minutes, then stop. I mean, every 5 or 10 minutes, you should be looking up and looking at something in the distance, because eye strain, especially if you're typing on with a screen. Look away for a minute every 10 minutes or so. But then after 45 minutes or an hour, I stop and I go for a walk around our large garden. And that has a double function. Firstly, it relaxes you like a sort of rubber band being relaxed. And the second is that very often you have very good ideas when you're walking. And I particularly do that if I'm in some problem, I can't understand something, or I don't know where to go next or whatever. I solvita ambulando. I solve it by walking. So I go off, walk round, which is what Charles Darwin and many people did. Einstein, nearly all thinkers do a lot of walking. And so I go off and then come back, and then you feel fresh, and then you write more. But for writing, I tell my students that they should never write in a day more than 2 or 3 hours. That's about the limit. And that means that you have to break up your work into different kinds of work, which means that you do, say, 2 or 3 hours of writing, a couple of hours of editing what you've written, reading it through and so on. I always write longhand and then type it in. And then an hour or two of reading or note taking or something else. So you intersperse the day with different kinds of concentration and work. So if you organize your time carefully, make sure you have a day more or less off at the weekend, make sure you try and get holidays. Basically, don't overwork. And the most dangerous time for overworking is in retirement, which we may talk about shortly, because there's nothing to stop you working forever. But basically, many people are saved from overworking by life. You know, they have to go off and cook the meal, or they have to do some housekeeping, or they have to go shopping, or they have to do something or other. Or academics are saved by committees, because, you know, half your days are filled up with boring committees and you just sit there. And so that's why retirement is dangerous, because the committee work ends. But basically, intersperse your work, think about it, think before you spend your whole life on something, how best to organize it, what tools you need. And that is another small thing. Academics use tools. They use now increasingly, obviously, computers and electronics of various kinds, but books and other things. And something I realized early was that the tools make the job easier or more difficult. In other words, if you do have books, or if you do have a good computer that you like, it makes a huge difference. And here it's an interesting thing that because most, certainly writers and academics, don't separate their personal from their working budget, there's a great conflict for many people, because if they say to their spouse, I need a new computer because this one's terribly slow and inefficient, or I need to buy this quite expensive book, they, through much of your life, they'll say, well, do you really need it? Because, the children really need some new clothes, or we need a holiday
Mm.
or something. It competes
Yep.
with all the other things. I've been enormously fortunate by the support of Sarah, and also the support of institutions which have helped me with bits of equipment and book budgets and things like that, so that I've been able to get more or less all the tools around my work that I need, and not had this conflict in any serious way.
This is quite important as well, isn't it? Because I just want to ask you about, I was going to ask you actually in the last bit, the role of libraries and so on. Obviously, you've got your own library, but you've gone to other libraries and stuff. And a lot of libraries are being closed down. And for non-academics who want to do the academic world work, if you like, how important do you think access to these spaces that you're talking about, and the libraries and the book collections and the computers, if you can't afford it or you haven't got the space at your own house, how important are those things, and how do you think we're being affected by these closures and so on and so forth?
Well, the libraries that have been closed down, I suppose, I mean, I don't know anything about this really, but we hear that many libraries are being closed down now. I'm sure they are. They're probably smaller libraries in smaller towns. The Oxford or Cambridge or Manchester city libraries would be still there. So larger cities and towns would have their libraries. And there's the London Library, which is a subscription library. I imagine it's still going, which you can join, and then they lend you books. And there are probably other lending libraries like that. And all the university libraries, if you have a good reason to use them, you can use them. But the problem is diminished, as we said before, to a certain extent by the fact that certainly if you're not just wanting the latest up-to-date textbooks, which are still only purchasable, but older books, you can probably get them in some form or other online, even if it's just to read them. So, I mean, the great thing about libraries when I started with them was that they were wonderful places to sit and work. They
Mm.
were very quiet, and there was this feeling of
Yeah,
that I
that's
have
the thing that
now.
I'm saying. Yeah.
But this has turned to a strange sort of phenomenon now, because if you go to the Cambridge University Library, uh, to me, it's a very sad place in one respect, which is that there are still quite a lot of people in there, but they're not reading books. They're not picking off shelves. Some of them, a few of them have a few books beside them, but they're working on computers. And they're probably reading the books online because it's quicker to find them there than to go up 3 stairs and look around on the shelves. And also, the huge advantage of books online, PDFs, is searching. I mean, that's just transformed the reading of books, because if you're looking for a particular subject, you can find it probably by the PDF search, which you can't find in a printed book. So I think these students like to work there because they only have a small
Mm.
bedroom. So the King's College Library and the University Library have quite a lot of readers, but they're readers of computer laptops.